Welcome back to the Growing Your Career seminar presented by the Brass Tree. My name is Don Wynn. I hope you're getting benefit from the program so far. I would appreciate feedback if you have comments to make. My email and telephone number are at the end of each presentation. Also, as part of the presentation, I will answer one-on-one questions and respond to any question or comment that you might have. In this session, we're going to be talking about consulting models. Well, why are consulting models important? Well, the reason they're important is because they help you understand the consulting profession. The biggest thing is the model that you work under has an immediate and direct impact on your compensation. It affects risk. Earlier sessions we talked about as compensation goes up, so does risk. And that relates to the consulting models under which you work. You could select a model to work under that would provide lower compensation, but at the same time would give you lower risk. The consulting models affect the entry points into the profession. There's several places that you can enter the profession, and they relate to consulting models, and I'll explain that as we go along. We'll go into some detail we'll go into more detail in the session that's on entry points. Finally, the consulting models affect the migration from model to model. When you first start in the profession, you might fit one model, and as you grow your career, you could migrate intentionally from one model of consulting to the next. And it's important to understand what those attributes of each model are. Before getting into the models directly, we need to talk about the individual components of the consulting model. There are four. The first component is the consultant or the contractor. The second component is the company or the client. This is the organization that is willing to pay for your services as a consultant or as a contractor. The minimum model would be a consultant and a client. The other models build up from that base configuration. The next element in a consulting model is a staffing agency. Probably you've all had some impact or some knowledge of staffing agencies. What they do is they act as a go-between between the consultant and the client company. Their relationship is with a client company. The client lets them know exactly what skills they need in particular people, and then the staffing agency does all of the search for the people or candidates that have those skills. The staffing company in consulting usually bills the client for hours worked by the consultant and pays the consultant. The next component of the consulting model is consulting company. Consulting companies are organized to sell their services as a company to clients. They have staff consultants that are people who are employees of the consulting company, and they do the majority of consulting for that company. They also use an augmented model, which means that they contract with independent consultants based on specific short-term needs. So that will make more sense as we go through the models themselves. The first model is model one, that's company staff. It's really a unique situation. It has two elements in that model. The consultant and the client. The client in this case is the employer. The consultant is an employee, but the client is not a consulting company. The client is a company that has need for internal consultants, people that have specialized skills and who may travel and do project-related work, but they're always employed by the client, and they always do internal consulting for different segments of that organization. As I said, the consultant is an employee of the client. The clients are usually large companies. Smaller companies don't have a need for internal consulting staffs. Especially large companies also have a tendency to be multinational, so there's still a travel component for the consultants. The consultants are typically needed because multinational companies, as they grow, they need to blend each of the organizations that is growing or new acquisitions into the parent company. And that sometimes takes a consulting level of effort to get the computer systems to work, to turn the company into a single cohesive unit. Sometimes internal consulting involves technology rollout. As the parent company decides on a particular type of technology they want to employ in the company, they use internal consultants to roll that technology out to the individual components within the company. When a company uses internal consultants, they may not necessarily use consulting titles. That represents an opportunity for the consultant or for the employee that's doing that role, because they can request job titles that reference consulting nature of the work. That could be helpful if a person wanted to change from one model to another, because they would be able to show consulting experience even though they're in an internal consulting role. Model 2 is consulting company staff. There are 3 elements in this particular model. The consultant is an employee, and they're an employee of the consulting company. The consulting company sells their consulting services to a client, to whoever their clientele is. It should be a number of different client companies. And so the consulting company as a whole has a relationship with the client company. The benefit of this is that the consultant is an employee, and that we will talk about employee benefits in just a second. Employee of the consulting company. The consulting company can be large or small. Large companies like Oracle or Computer Sciences or IBM have thousands, tens of thousands of consultants that work for them who service the clients of those companies. In a large company, the consultant gets benefits that are different than they might get in a large company. Here I'm not talking about employee benefits necessarily. I'm talking about the other benefits of being a member of a large company. A smaller company, some consulting companies may be 5 or 10 or 20 or 50 consultants. Those are relatively small companies, and they also provide opportunities to the consultant that maybe a larger company wouldn't provide. A large company, for example, would allow a consultant to specialize in really close detail. So their specialty could be pinpointed. Whereas in a smaller company, a consultant would probably need to be a lot more of a generalist. So if a person wanted to focus in a small area, then they might fit a larger company better. If they wanted to be more of a centrist or work in multiple areas, then a smaller company would maybe be a better fit. Regardless of the size of the company, consulting companies typically provide training support for their employees. The training support provided by a small company would be to allow their employees to go to training classes that are necessary for them to maintain their consulting level skills. So the smaller companies typically would not have internal training programs because the scale of the company prevents it. Larger companies may have internal training so that you can go to in-house training, and that's another way that you would maintain your consulting skills, which is such an important part of consulting. So training support is something you would expect from both large and small companies, but it would be a little different based on the size of the company that you work for. If you're working in a large company, it will give you the potential, the possibility to gain experience as an instructor in the internal training program. You could work on a consulting project, and then when a project is over, when you're between projects, then you could teach a class, and then you could become a consultant on the next project that becomes available. So you wouldn't be a full-time instructor necessarily, but you would be able to gain experience and build your resume and have an indication on your resume that you were an instructor in a particular area. So it's resume building. So the training support has two elements to it: as a student and also as a potential instructor. Provides employee benefits. We're going to talk about those in just a second in a little bit more detail. Marketing for future work. This is an important thing because it means that the consulting company, regardless of the size, has a team of people or has a unit within the company whose responsibility it is to respond to requests for marketing services, quotes, and that sort of thing, to do the marketing in order to close deals to do for the consulting work itself. If you don't want to be involved too directly in the marketing part of consulting, so you don't want to market your services, then Model 2 is ideal for that because it takes that burden off of the consultant. The consultant may be asked to support that, so you might make presentations to prospective clients, or you might have meetings with prospective clients, but it is not and would not be your primary responsibility. As part of a consulting company staff, you have the opportunity to expand your resume. Sometimes clients select the employees from a consulting company that work on their project, but the majority of the time, the client signs a contract with a consulting company, and the consulting company has latitude about which of their consultants they assign to a given project. Now, what that means is that your resume may not have to be as good as it would be if it's being perused one at a time by the client company. So You could go to several projects, add those projects to your resume, and your resume builds by support and by being a part of a consulting company. And lastly, consulting companies provide or may provide promotional opportunities. You may want to be a consultant right now, but you may want to move into a management role. And if you're a member of a company, then you might have that opportunity. Once you've proven that you have skills, then you could become a managing consultant, or you could move into marketing or move into some other role within the company that didn't require travel, or that was related to consulting but not direct consulting. So you'd have promotional opportunities. Some consulting companies offer partnerships, so you could become a partner in a consulting company. Employee benefits. And we talk about employee benefits and see that in the news, and we all at work talk about employee benefits. Models 1 and 2 in consulting both have employee benefits, and we shouldn't minimize the importance of those. Health insurance is a very significant employee benefit. If you work in any model in consulting other than model 1 or 2, your work will not provide health insurance. So you would have to provide that requirement yourself. Personal time, vacation and sick leave, that sort of time. Models 1 and 2 would typically have vacation time, paid vacation. The consultants that work in models 3 through 6 can also take vacation. They can be out sick. They will be out sick. But when they're on vacation and when they're out sick, their income typically stops. So the difference is paid vacation versus unpaid vacation. So it's a significant element in the decision about what model you would work in. Model 1 and 2 would provide internal, external training support. And I've talked about that quite a bit already, but training is such an important thing in consulting because it allows you to keep your consulting skills at the level that they need to be in order to be a consultant. Funded retirement programs. A lot of companies have funded retirement. The models beyond 1 and 2 don't have that unless you provide it yourself. So there is no company-sponsored funded retirement program. Same thing is true for savings. Sometimes companies have a matching program where if you put $100 into savings, they would put $50 into your savings account. There's no programs like that at all in the remaining models in consulting. Bench time is an employee benefit that you get in models 1 and 2. And what that means is that if you're a consultant, your work really is based on serving a client. If you don't have a client and you're in model 1 or 2, your income continues. Let's say you work on a project that completes on September the 1st, and the next project is not scheduled to start until January the 1st. Between September and January, the company would continue to pay your salary. You'd continue to get benefits. You would be expected to do something, but you wouldn't be doing consulting work. Once you're in models beyond 1 and 2, there's no such thing as bench time. You may be between clients. So you have an existing client that stops, the project stops on September the 1st, and your next client starts on January the 1st. That means that you have 3 months of zero income if you work in any model other than model 1 and 2. There are other employee benefits, but the point of this is that you should consider the absence of employee benefits in models 3 through 6, and that's a serious consideration as you enter one of those consulting models. Because after the first 2 models, you no longer have a status as an employee. Consulting model 3, independent with a single partner. An independent, that means that your work status is not as an employee. You essentially are self-employed. Consulting model 3 has 3 participants. There are 2 variants, and we're going to talk about the first variant here. It looks an awful lot like the chart that we showed for model 2, which was to be an employee of a consulting company. The difference between that model and this model is that this consultant is contracting to the consulting company. So the consulting company has a relationship with their clients, and as they have consulting projects, they augment their own internal staff with people who work as independent consultants on a project-by-project basis. So in this case, the consultant is self-employed. They sign a contract with the consulting company to provide their services to a specific client for a specific length of time. So this is variant 1 of model number 3. Variant 2 of model number 3. Again, the consultant is a independent contractor. There's a staffing agency that acts as a go-between between the consultant and the client company. When the client company is needing consulting services from an individual consultant, they contact the staffing agency with their requirement, and the staffing agency does the search. The consultant typically would sign a contract with a staffing agency. The staffing agency would sign another contract with a client. When the consultant performs their work, they create a bill for their services, submit it to the staffing agency, and the staffing agency submits that to the client, and the client pays the staffing agency, who then pays the consultant. Independent with multiple partners is model number 4. In this case, it looks a lot like model 3, except rather than having one go-between, you have 2 go-betweens. The relationship here is with the consulting company has a relationship with their client. And as the consulting company is building up to staff projects, they may not have enough internal consultants to do that, and rather than search for those consultants themselves, they work through staffing agencies to find those consultants that can meet the requirement. And finally, the consultant. So the consultant has a relationship with the staffing company has a relationship with consulting company has a relationship with the client. The net result of the billing in this situation is that the client has a willingness to spend a fixed amount of money for consulting services. And as there are more people between the consultant and the client, then the amount of money that they require to pay for their work that they do has to be considered, so that the consultant's percentage of the amount willing to be paid by the client goes down. Fully independent. This is probably the most desirable position for an independent consultant to be in. And the reason is because there's no go-between. The client company, the client contracts directly with a consultant. In my experience, this situation doesn't exist very often, and the reason is because before the client would be willing to do this, they would have to have a relationship with a consultant initially. So a few consultants are able to have this sort of arrangement, but the majority have to work through a staffing agency or a consulting company if they want to be an independent. The beauty of this particular model is that the consultant gets all the money that the client is willing to pay for their services. Finally, the last model, Model 6, is a transitional model. It's independent consultants working as a small consulting company. This might be something that you might aspire to if you joined a consulting company. You could have this as a career objective, but it would not be something you would do on day one. You would have to build to be able to do this. The models, the people that fit in this particular model is a client. You have a consultant who works directly with a client, and that consultant has other consultants that they work with. They may initially be asked by the client, do you know anyone in your contact list who could work in this specific area for us? And the consultant would make a referral to someone else in their network. When that happens, and it happens quite a few times, the consultant could decide that I'm effectively acting as an agent for these people I'm referring, so why don't I form myself into a small consulting company, sort of the embryonic consulting company, and then add one or two people who are employees, and as those people work on a consulting task, then the consultant agent would get some amount of money for every hour those associated consultants work. So this is an embryonic stage for a full-blown, full-service consulting company. And independents can sometimes find themselves in this position, so it becomes almost automatic to happen. Embryonic stage of consulting company starts as referrals, begin to act as agents, and ownership partner potential if you work in one of those companies. Once again, why are consulting models important? They're important because they affect compensation, they affect risk, they affect entry points, and they affect migration from one model to the next or to another model. The migration is not necessarily from Model 1 to Model 2, then from Model 2 to Model 3, then to Model 3 to 4. It's not sequential like that. And you can also have a migration from Model 4 to Model 3. So you can migrate back. I've done that in my own working lifetime. I started as an employee in my consulting career. I started as an employee of a consulting company, a staff consultant. I became an independent consultant working through agents. And after some number of years in that role, I decided I would rather be an employee for a lot of reasons, and we'll talk about that later in the course. But I moved back into an employee role with a small consulting company, and finally near this stage of my career, I decided to become an independent once again, and that's the role that I'm working under now. That's the model that I work under now. So you can migrate back and forth, but you need to understand what you gain and what you give up as you make that sort of migration. Here's the course outline. We just completed session 4. Session 5 is financial considerations. Everything in consulting is not about cashing big checks. There are a lot of negative things associated with finance in consulting, and we're going to talk about all of that in some detail next time. Then we're going to talk about how to enter the profession and exactly where the entry points are and how you would go about entering the profession, and I will help with that. Session 7 is work life as a consultant. What exactly does a consultant do, but more about what is it like to be a consultant. There's all sorts of issues away from the consulting or the client side that have an impact on the work life of a consultant, and we're going to talk about all of those. Session 8 is about joining and leaving a client. Once you become a consultant and you're going to a client site, there are things you should do before you join that, before you arrive. There are things that you should do when you're there, and there are things that you should do as you prepare to leave. And once again, there are things that you should do between clients, and that's session 8. Finally, in session 9, we're going to have a recap with questions, and I will provide answers to those questions that are submitted during the other sessions in the course. So now let's continue to grow your career together. Now would be a good time to mention my book again, Develop Your Soft Skills. Soft skills are such an important part of consulting, and this is a little book that's entertaining. It's appropriate for anyone who wants to work in consulting. There's so many things that you have to do as a consultant beyond knowing the technicalities of the area that where your specialty is. So consider my book. It's available in the Kindle version. It's also available in paperback. Here are my contact information. If you have any question at all, please call, and I will respond as well as I can possibly respond. I'll tell you as much as I can about this profession. Thank you very much. Hope to see you next time.